This video is sponsored by Wondrous and Dangerous Consortiums, now on Kickstarter. More on them later. Greetings gamers, my name is Anto and I am super busy this week. So today I want to run you through one of my absolute favorite resources for Dungeon Masters. It's something I've talked about a little bit here and there over the years on the channel, but I think that it deserves its own dedicated video, and that is the Watabu set of generators. So over the years, I have talked about several of the generators from Watabu in various amounts of depth, but I know that every time I do, it's the first time that someone is hearing about it. So I wanted to make a video where I just walk through kind of the whole suite of generators on Watabu and show you just how awesome it is. If you're a GM and you want to run a game, you could pretty much put a near full campaign together with this site. It's really awesome. So here we are on the Watabu itch.io page, and you can see there are a whole bunch of generators. I'll link this down in the description below, obviously. And the one you're probably most familiar with will be the Medieval Fantasy City generator. That's like the OG one, the one that I have talked about the most on the channel, but there's a whole bunch of other generators on this site that are really useful. I'm going to take a really brief look at some of them today to show off kind of what they can do, starting with the Fantasy City generator. So if we click into this, this will generate you a top-down view of a fantasy city, and you have a huge amount of control over what you see and generate in the city. If you right click anywhere on it, you have the option to just make a new city, but then you also have the option to go in and change elements of the labeling and a huge amount of options for style. Style is what I was looking for. So you got the option to go in and change a huge amount about the style of the city. So you can go in and change the color scheme. And what I really love about this is you can save and load presets as JSON files. So I have previously saved a Watabu palette. And if we go ahead and apply that, yeah, straight away, we get a coloration for the city and it immediately looks a little better. And we can go into different elements of it and we can turn off the grid and the labels, and we can turn off all of those kind of things, like turn off the font sizes. We can show alleyways, we can show trees and forests if we want it surrounded by forests. And it gives you so much control over what you want to do. And you can hover over it and it'll tell you the name of the places. And when you're ready, you can go ahead and you can export this out as a PNG, an SVG, or as a JSON file. And there's a whole bunch of resources out there for things like Foundry that'll take the JSON file of this and import it into your world with the image and put in labels for all of the places that have labeled on this file. And it's awesome. I use the Fantasy City generator if I can't find a city map for a location my players are going to, or if I want a place really quickly. Let's say they're going to a new town, I'll just re-roll until I get something that feels right. Feels like a small village or like small town to me. It's got some walls, maybe it's what I need. I'll roll until I find what I need, and then I can just use this if they need a map. If you want something a little smaller scale than the city generator, there is a village generator. This is something that I really like to use for random travel. If my players are going through just a tiny little town on their way to somewhere else, this gives like a really nice looking map to be like, well, here's where some of the buildings are in this tiny little hamlet that you've passed through on your way to the big city. Just like all the other options, you can change the style and all of the different parameters for it, but I'll almost always just come in here and roll new village a couple times until I get something that I think looks quite cool. Like I like this one. I like all of the houses in the center around what looks like a church, and I'm like, that's kind of interesting. we'll roll with that. Why are all these people in a circle around the church and what's the significance of the tree in the middle? Immediately gets my brain firing. I've talked a lot about using factions to improve the texture of your world building, which is why I'm super pleased that today's video is sponsored by Wondrous and Dangerous Consortiums, now on Kickstarter. This book is a world building toolbox packed with detailed guilds, cults, mercenary companies, secret societies, political factions, and rivalry systems designed to create those emergent stories that react to your players' choices and provide consequences for their actions. You can also get the setting guide for the world of Zendria, a high fantasy system filled with good and evil that is packed with adventures which are designed for both good and evil characters. And the really cool thing about Zendria is that the setting and the adventures are built so that you can approach them from either side. You can run the game as a party of heroes or as a party of villains and see how the world changes depending on the choices your group makes. And that gives the setting a ton of replayability that you don't see a lot of normally. Zendria is also system agnostic, and it'll include a bunch of PDF playbooks to run adventures with D&D, Shadowdark, Castles and Crusades, Tales of the Valiant, Nimble 2E, and that just gives you even more options at the table. The books are completely human-made with no AI artwork or writing. They're being printed in the US, and all the principal writing work is done for the project, and they're asking for a realistic starting goal and using established print partners in place right from the start, which is something that I personally love to see during a crowdfunding campaign. The campaign is live right now and runs until June 25th. So if you're a GM, a world builder, or someone who loves rich sandbox settings and faction-driven storytelling, go check out the Kickstarter linked in the description below. Thanks again to Fantasy Companion Workshop for supporting the channel, but for now, back to the video. If you're playing a city-based campaign, the neighborhood generator is really useful. You can click into that and it will give you a neighborhood layout. So like a small zoomed in version of a map of like dense neighborhood streets within a city. And it's just really like useful. One of the ways that I especially like to use this is to export out these segments as assets to be used in map making programs. So if you have Wonderdraft, for example, you can export these out as PNGs or as SVGs and import them into Wonderdraft as pre-made little slices of a city to build your own city within Wonderdraft and not have to manually place hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of individual houses. It saves you so much time. Another option is the 3D city generator. Now this isn't something that I use all of the time, but if you want to get a kind of sense of how a city might look, or if you want to put together some screenshots maybe of some perspectives of different views of the city, this can be really useful. Like I say, it's not one that I use all of the time, but I have used it a couple of times to make some kind of like drama shots. You zoom in and you find your angles where you want it, and then you take your screenshots and be like, well, this is the sort of thing that you see on approach, and then use that in combination with the main top-down city generator. Next up, we have the cave and glade generator. This is just great for generating natural dungeons. So if you want to run your players through a dungeon in a cavern, this is one of the quickest ways to do it. Again, very similar to all of the Watabi generators. If you right click, you get a whole bunch of options to change the style, to display different elements, and then you can re-roll and get new maps. You can have a whole cave network, the Catacombs of Raya, straight away. And if you go ahead and just export this out as an SVG or a PNG, you can load it straight up into your VTT of choice and be good to go exceptionally quickly. It's one of my favorite elements of the one-page dungeon. So if we click on that, that is very much like the cavern generator, except it generates square dungeons. So this will generate rooms and corridors and features and water and just a ton of elements for that classic dungeon crawl feel. But my favorite element of it, and I've talked about it in this video up here, is that you can export it out and there is a module in Foundry that you can use to pull in the PNG and the JSON file for this, and it will drag it into a scene in Foundry with the walls in place, with everything that you need, with doors, with the journal entries for anything that's been generated by the one-page dungeon maker, and you can have a session of play ready to go in minutes. I use this all the time when I'm really tight on time to prep my sessions. I will look through the list of monsters for the CR that my players are appropriately leveled for. I'll find a kind of monster theme and a handful of monsters, and then I will go to One Page Dungeon and find a dungeon for them and be like, right, today you go into a dungeon and we're going to figure it out. And I'll improvise my way through most of the session, because a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of mapping out the dungeon is done for me, and I've played long enough that I can just look at monsters and kind of get a narrative sense of how to use them in the moment. And then finally, if you want to make like a whole ass campaign, Perilous Shores is one of the quickest ways to do it, honestly. So this will just give you a little map with some points of interest on it, and if you wanted to run a short campaign and didn't want to do a huge amount of prep, this is honestly more than sufficient. So if we re-roll a region, so cool, this has given us a region with a bunch of different points of interest. The Western Desert, the Shadow Talon, this massive tower city, the Ambercrest Range, Dawnfall, Timbercore, White Road, the Lair of Night in the Dragon Sands, the naming conventions, the Shore of Knowledge and the City of the Tide Beast. The names are evocative enough that I would run this. Like, I would run this for a short campaign. I would happily put some players who wanted to play some D&D and were unsure whether they wanted a long-term commitment, get this, plonk it down, put them in front of it, and be like, right, you start in the city of Cloudton, and then use the city generator to generate the map of that city. Here's the city of Cloudton. Then I would be like, here is your quest. You need to go out to the, let's just say, the Lair of Night, and on the way you might go through White Road, and I'd use the village generator to generate a village to show them White Road. And maybe they pass through the Cold Bloom Heights, and I'd use the Cavern generator to generate them a dungeon there. And then they'd get to the Lair of Night, and I'd use the one-page dungeon to be like, this is the dungeon that you've quested to. And with basically no prep on my part, other than choosing what monster to put in the locations, whole quest line, whole world, just put down before them. And if you want to see how I use this in action, I will link an old video that I made for making a campaign setting in like an hour or a day. I can't remember which, but I put together like a whole campaign setting, and a lot of that work came from using Watabu generators. So I hope you found this inspiring. I hope you go and check Watabu out down in the description, and let me know how you use these tools in your game. If you want to keep watching, check out this video where I talk about my top TTRPG tools that aren't ChatGPT. But until next time, happy gaming.